Hello, web programming students. Let's continue with our CSS walkthrough. So just as a reminder, this is how you write CSS. You have a selector and you have a declaration. And so for this example, there's got H1 here. The color of the text will be blue. So here's our property and here's our value. So for colors on the web, we have several ways of showing color. One of them is the hexadecimal notation, otherwise known as hex colors. It's a counting system with 16 digits, 1 through 9, and then A through F. And then each pixel on the screen is a combination of red, green, and blue light. There are 256 levels of this, from 0 to 255. So you may remember this as RGB colors. And a hex color specifies the level of red, green, and blue light that goes into a given color. So the convention is RR, GG, and BB, which makes this hex here. We can use these to create 16,000 distinct colors. Here are some of them. And then at the highest level, all 255s is FF, 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 which is white. And at the lowest, all zeros is black. So you go from black to white. Back in the old days, when we only had 8 bits in our color monitors, web page colors didn't come out so well. So there were 216 web safe colors so that they look similar on Macs and PCs. And they use the numerals 00336699 and CC and FF. So of these combinations, you could get colors that were safe on the web. We can also use a name to specify colors like tomato or Dodger blue or light gray or pink or something like that. And so you can do just the name, or you can do RGB numbers. Instead of hexadecimals, you can use RGB using the 255 scale. And you can use RGB with an alpha channel. So from 0 to 1, you can have transparency. And you can use hue, saturation, and luminosity to specify colors. And a lot of people like HSL better because it's more intuitive to some people. So let's get into that a little bit. So RGB and RGBA, again, 0 to 255 in the red, green, and blue channels. And you'd write them out RGB 38, 119, 253. And if you had an alpha channel, then you'd add some number between 0 and 1. And then that would be your RGBA colors. Hue, saturation, and luminosity, otherwise known as lightness or luminance. Hue is 0 to 360. So 0 to 360 with red at 0 or red at 0 here along this band. Saturation is 0 to 100%, where 0 is gray and 100% is the full color. So here, this is the full red. So a saturation is at 100. So if you desaturate things, you turn them gray, right? And then luminosity is how bright or how light it is. And so 0 is black and 100% luminous is white. So no color at all. So the color red is halfway between total black and total white. And then you can add an alpha channel on top of this to get transparency going. So now that we've talked about colors, let's talk about fonts and typography. So here again is that example, and instead of color, we show the font family, and this is how you specify which fonts you use in your HTML and your CSS. So we use font family, and then we'll get into the specifics of this stuff over here. But here's a typeface name, and then I'll get into what this is about here next. This is the font we want, but if in case that's not available, then we can specify a few backups, including sans serif. So whatever sans serif default font is on your machine, you can use that. You can also specify other fonts in the middle, in between here, separate them by commas. But this is Google font that we'll talk about in a second. So once you find a typeface you want in Google Fonts, you can click on it and then go into the page for it. And then you want to find the select this style button. So you can press that button, and we'll go through this as we do our demo. And then that'll give you the necessary code to copy and paste into your HTML and CSS. And there's two ways to do that. So once you have made all your selections, it aggregates them, and you can press this button up here, and then it gives you this slide out panel. And method one, which one I like better, is the link version. So you copy all of this code into your head of your HTML, and you copy this into your CSS to whichever selector you want. So it could be H1s, it could be paragraphs, depending on what font you want to make what text. The other way to use Google Fonts is to use the @ the @import rule here. So instead of link, you could click this one, and then you copy this into the head of your HTML, and then you copy this font family code into your CSS for whichever selector you want. So those are Google Fonts. We'll move on to Adobe Fonts here. Back in the day, Typekit was the way you would get fonts, and was one way to get fonts, and eventually got bought by Adobe, but it works similarly to Google Fonts. Adobe has a relationship with other foundries, and you can get fonts from them. The nice thing about Google and Adobe is that they've worked out all the licensing issues for you. Back in the day, there were licensing issues, and so you could use fonts, but you maybe get dinged for infringement, but now they've kind of worked this out. So it's sort of like the Spotify of fonts. So the process for using Adobe Fonts is slightly different, but the end result is the same. You get some HTML code to put in your head of your HTML, and then you have to work your own font family code. So we'll show you this going in the demo. You can use fonts not on the web. So fonts that are already pre-installed on your computer or your phone. You can reference things like Arial or Times New Roman are usually available by default. And so you can just write them in your font family like so. And again, you would end with a serif or sans serif kind of backup. There's other ones here. So if you wanted to specify Courier here, then you could add mono space fonts here as your default. If you got the HTML and CSS book, there's lots more detail on it. Or you can find it on the web too. There is a way to serve your own fonts. If you have your own font files, if you design your own fonts and don't have them distributed by Google or Adobe or some other place, then you can upload them to your web hosting and serve them yourself. Now, this could be a way to get around licensing issues. So be careful when you're doing this. Be sure you're allowed to use these fonts. But what happens is you write an @ rule called @fontface in your CSS, and then here's your curly brackets. And then you specify your font family. And so mine called my own font. And then you do an src:\URL, and then you write the path to your file itself. So if you save it in a folder, write the folder name. If not, just skip it. And then you can reference this like you would a CSS file. And then you can serve your own fonts. So now you have fonts. What do you do with them? So we can use typography concepts to change it around and customize it. So here are a few big ones. Font family you've seen before. Font size, so you can make pixels. I like using Ms or Rems, usually Ms, because they scale nicely when you have different types of screens, but you can use pixels if you like. Then there's font weight, so usually this is bold or normal. And then font style, you can use italics if you want. So there's other ways to handle typography. What else we can control? We can control font variance, letter spacing, kind of like kerning, line height, so how much height your lines fit in. Text align, decoration is where the underline comes from, and we'll use that in your demo. Text indent, overflow, shadow, so text shadow is like a drop shadow. Text transform, you can take text and capitalize it or uppercase it or lowercase it. Then it's white space, there's word breaks and word space. You can all do this in CSS. And if you want to look up what to use these for, you can always go to cssreference.io, and that has a nice summary of how you can use these. So before we get into our demo, let's do a little HTML review. So quick review, the anatomy of a web page. Here's your header, your HTML header. Here's nav, a navigation bar. Article could go here. A section could go here, and a side could go here. It's kind of like a sidebar. You can interchange articles and sections there for your own use. And then a footer down here. So those are some basic HTML blocks you can use. These are what are called empty elements. So empty elements, you can't nest things inside of them. So line breaks, paragraph breaks, images, you can't embed an image inside of an image, doesn't work that way. External links, you can't embed a link within a link. Metadata is just by itself, so you can't embed data inside of metadata. And inputs on forums, we'll talk about forums later in the semester. You can't embed data into a data entry form like this. So these go by themselves. They don't have anything inside of them, like other HTML things inside of them. Let's talk about URLs, short for Uniform Resource Locator. If you ever wanted to know what that actually meant, that's what it is. An absolute link. The full value of the href or src is the actual web address, including the HTTP part with the colon and the slashes. So for Amazon, this is the entire thing. This is an absolute link. Here's an absolute link for some image on Imgur. A relative link is not a specific domain name, but where the pages are in relation to the current page. So if I have page 1 and it's saved in the same folder as page 2, then I can just reference page 2 in this name. But if it's in a folder, then I may need to tell the browser, hey, it's in this folder, and this is the name of the file. So we'll get into this as we go along the semester. So this is an absolute link. Here's the Amazon link, and here's a relative link for a page or some other resource that's within your website. Just as a review, HTML tags have a name of the attribute and some value, and then the closing tag here. Images, so IMG, we've worked with this before in the first demo and then in last week's demo. Say if the link doesn't work, if you have a bad relative link, you can get one of these broken image things, and here is some either title text or alt text that shows up when this doesn't work. So here is how the image, just to review how the tag is written. So IMG and then src equals pizza.jpg in quotes. And then it's always good to write alternate text for screen readers and for the visually impaired. So here you go. When you're working with file types on screen, if this is new to you, then you have different options. So a JPEG is like an image of a photo. Okay. There's no transparency involved in a JPEG. JPEGs are very compressed, so they load quickly on websites usually, but they may not have the best photo quality. GIFs or GIFs, depending on how you pronounce them, used for animations. You can have some transparency. They're usually smaller because there's a certain number of colors that they're limited to. Animated GIFs or GIFs are what you would use that file type for. PNGs. I like PNGs because they combine transparency with photo quality. And so if you have text, flat text or flat vectors, in addition to photos, PNGs is the way to go, although they do make larger file sizes than JPEGs. And then finally, SVGs are scalar vector graphics. This is really just math. So this is a circle that's defined by math, and you can make these in Illustrator or write them out by hand, but you can make these in Illustrator or whatever program you use. And then these are vector graphics. So not like these here, which are raster graphics. This is a vector that you can scale and maintain the quality. So you always want to have a balance between file size and quality. Images generally are 72 dots per inch or pixels per inch on screens. This doesn't matter so much anymore. Back when you only had 72 DPI screens, it mattered, but now screens are much bigger, pack more dots and pixels into the device, and so it's not an issue anymore. So I would probably not worry about 72. I sometimes go to 150, but the goal is to have the smallest file size possible with the highest quality possible so that your users get your images rapidly. There are two ways to use your images. We've seen this already. So using the IMG element in HTML is like the pizza image we just saw. So if it's crucial to the content of the document, it should be added as an AMG with alternative text. So just like we'd seen with the pizza image, that's one way to do it. The demo that we did last week with the kid drinking the soda over dotted patterns, the dotted pattern is the background image. So the kid drinking soda would be this IMG. The polka dot pattern behind it in the demo was this guy here, background images. And we'll do this in our, we've done this in our demo. The background property, so we can do background colors, we can do background images, which we did already. We can specify whether they repeat or not. So we have a lot of ways to control what our background looks like. And so for our demo, we're going to make lists. Lists are used to group related information together. In modern web development, we use them for a lot. So we'll use them for general content of lists or in navigation. So navigation in HTML utilizes lists to organize information. So they help create a well-structured, more accessible, easy to maintain document. And then you'll have things that you can attach CSS styles to, and we'll do that as our demo. The first type of list to talk about is unordered list or bulleted lists when a set of items can be placed in any order. There's no 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're just bullet points. So a shopping list is one of these types of unordered lists. You can use CSS to take the bullet out or change it to a different thing. So usually they're disks, the bullets. You can make them circles, so with empty in the middle, or squares, or just none. Most of the time, you're just going to do none. So in your HTML, an unordered list starts with a UL, and we're going to make these. And then each of the list items gets this LI tag on both sides of the actual thing. So here's a shopping list. Whoa, it's out of order. This should say bread, coffee, beans, milk, butter. Using lists, we can make navigations sort of like this or like this. So an unordered list would be all of this, and then this would be a list item, this would be a list item, this would be a list item, that one, and that one. Or here, list item, list item, list item, list item, list item. So that's how we can make navigation. We'll do that going forward. An ordered list is a numbered list. So it's not just numbers. It could be A, B, C, D, and so forth, lowercase or uppercase, or 1, 2, 3 using the I character. So depending on their system, you can specify this. So in your HTML, you have an ordered list with an OL, not the UL, and then each list item goes like here, and then the browser knows to put numbers on it. Here are different types of ordered lists and unordered lists. Here's an example. Here's another example with sub-items. These are unordered lists here, at least. Here's an ordered list. There you go. Description list, not used as much, but you can associate specific names with their values within a list. So like an ingredient list, and their descriptions can go with it. You can use them that way. We're not going to use them. We're not going to do this as a demo with them, but this is what it could look like. Here's a description list with a description item. Instead of LI, it's DT for the title, and then the data almost DD. And it would look like this. DL, DT, DD. So here's an example of a description list. So here's a list item, list item, list item with description. So there you go. This is also a type of description list. Here's the title, and then here's the actual description down here. Same here. Description title, description text. So let's do it. Let's do this demo. Hello, web programming students. Here's demo take 2. Let's share the real screen this time. So here's the web page we're going to make. Here is a navigation with an unordered list with some hovering. Got some colors, some CSS colors, and we're going to use some typography techniques in CSS to make all of this. So now we'll go to Atom. And here's our HTML. So first, let's start building our HTML. First, we'll start with a div. And I'll close the div, of course. Next, we want to make a nav. And then inside that nav, we're going to use an unordered list, which is UL, unordered. There's no numbers or letters, just bullet points. And then our demo has 4 of these. So I'm going to have 4 list items. So first one is John. Second one, Paul. Third one, George. Fourth one, Ringo. And so here again, our div that has everything, our nav, our unordered list, and our list items. So if I save this, go back to my browser, 3, 2, 1, refresh. Here is my list, got bullet points. These aren't clickable because we didn't make any links, and it's in very standard Times New Roman text by default. So now we can start to apply colors and typography to this to make this. From drab to fab. All right. Now I have this HTML part built out. I have to connect my HTML file with my CSS file. So to do that, we need to write a link. href equals. Now it's in the same folder, so I don't need to specify any folder names. So we can just write style.css directly. And then we have a couple other things we need to do. Rel equals style sheet, as always, and type equals text/CSS. And then I write arrow to end it. And that's how we connect our HTML file with our CSS file. So save that. Now we can go into our CSS file. I've given you a universal selector here, the CSS reset, which has margin 0, padding 0, and border 0. No other properties yet. We're going to fill in some body here, and I have a comment here with vertical unordered list, which is what we're going to do with the other page. So before we do that, just want to show you what the CSS reset looks like with this margin, padding, and border all set to 0. So before we connected our CSS, it looked like this. But when we connect our CSS and I'll refresh this, this should all move to this corner here because there's going to be no margins or paddings or borders. So 3, 2, 1, refresh. And now you see it has moved way into the corner because there's no margins or padding here. All 0, and so we start fresh. So our body, if you notice in our demo, this body here is this gray color. Right now we got nothing, so we'll add a color to this. Background color. The background color is actually hex color 999. So I'll just show you what that looks like. Save, return to the browser, 3, 2, 1, refresh, and now we got the gray color. So that's done. Go back to Atom. So now we can start styling some of the other pieces. Now, oops, I could do div because that's what we have in our HTML. Div. Likely in your pages, you'll have more than one div, and so we should separate them using an ID or a class. So in our case, I'll just make an ID, we'll call it container, which is pretty standard for like the big div inside the body to call a container. So I'll save this. And then in order to style this div here, we need to write it in our CSS, not with this, but with a hashtag or a £sign or an octothorpe container. And then of course we have our curly brackets. And now we can start to style this a certain way. And so one thing we can do is add a background color to it. And that background color, I'll tell you right now, is 1235AA. We should set a width for our container as well. The width is here 300 pixels, and I'll add some padding just to space it out a little bit. We'll talk about padding next week in depth, but for now you can just follow along. Give yourself padding top of 25 pixels and padding bottom 25 pixels. So once I save this, I can go back to my browser and I'll show you what happened with it. 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now we at least have the blue background color that we need. So it's getting closer to this. Still have a little more work to do. So let's go back to our CSS in Atom. So the next one we can style is our nav. Now we could add a class to this, but since we generally only have one navigation, you might have two sometimes, but since there's really only one navigation in this page, we can just style the nav directly. In our CSS, we'll write nav, our curly brackets. The nav itself has a background color. This background color is ECA BB2. And this also has a width, not 300, but a little less, 250 pixels. And we'll do another padding top of 25 pixels and padding bottom 25 pixels. So let's save this, go back to our browser, 3, 2, 1, refresh, and getting there. We actually have one more thing to add before we finish with nav. So in our nav, we'll just add a margin. Again, we'll go over this next week, but just follow along for the moment. We'll do margin left of 25 pixels, and this will move this off that edge of the screen. 3, 2, 1, refresh, and now we've at least moved it off this edge here. The pink part is off the edge. Still got the bullets, we'll take care of that coming up, but at least we have a shape similar to our demo. Finished product. So the next thing we can do is start to style up our unordered list. Now, it happens that you could have multiple unordered lists in your pages. So you may want to add an ID or a class to this. So we'll add an ID, call this Beatles. These are the Beatles. And if we style, besides divs, if we style anything besides like navs or unordered lists or list items with an ID, then we write it a certain way in our HTML, or in our CSS, sorry. So I'll give myself a little room. And an unordered list that has an ID attached to it, we write it right next to each other. So without a space in between, this is how we mark that this unordered list and this ID gets styled a certain way, like this. And I'm just going to add another margin left to this just to move it over a little more. So if I save this and go back, show you what it looks like, 3, 2, 1. Now our text is not stuck in the little space here. It's right in the middle. And then we'll start to use more typography techniques to get this to look like this. Back into Atom. Give myself a little more room so I can see. Next thing we can do is start to style the individual list items. So now we're styling these guys. So what can we do here? We can get rid of the bullet points. So to do that, we'll do list style type. And then out of all these choices here, we want none. So that gets rid of the bullet points. Next thing we can do is give ourselves a little bit of height to each of the list items. So we can do 35 pixels, and we can do a width of 200 pixels. And we can do a background color for each of those list items. This one in particular is 666. Can't forget the semicolon. And then we can do some margins just to give ourselves a little bit of room. So 20 pixels and padding top. Again, we'll go over this next week, what this does all mean. Or no, let's do 15. Okay. So let's save this and go back to our browser, see what this looks like. 3, 2, 1, refresh. And now it's starting to look a little more like our final result. We do need to do little typography things here. So in our example, these names are in the middle. Ours are on the edge on the left. So we need to move them over. And to move them over, last thing, here's our first one for the day, text align, center. So once we do text align center for our list items, back to our browser, 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now they're in the center, and now we're really cooking. So now it's a matter of styling up these names. But before we do that, let's go into our index and let's make them links. So we need to add a little bit of HTML to these list items. So in order to make these clickable, we need to add our anchor links, if you remember from before, a href. Here's where a URL goes. So we can put, say, jefferson.edu, just for example's sake. So that's the first part of the anchor link. And then the second part goes after the part we're done clicking on. So here's our list item. Here's our href part, the first part of the link tag. The thing we actually click on is this part. And then we close the A and we close the list item. So we need to do the same for our other ones. And in the meantime, since we don't have a real links, we can just use a hashtag or # or octothorpe there. That's here. And then the same thing for George Ringo. That # there makes it clickable, but doesn't go anywhere. So that's one way to practice your HTML, your links writing, just with kind of dummy links. So now that we've done that, we can go back to our browser. 3, 2, 1, refresh. And now you can see that they've turned blue, or in this case, purple. This was clicked already. And is there an underline? So we have to get rid of that underline. And we have to add our proper typeface to this. So we're getting there, slow by slow, but we're getting there. Now we can style these individually. So we can go back to our Atom, go to CSS. Now we could, since there are no other A links in here, just start styling like this. But sometimes we need to get specific and style only the ones that are part of the list items. So if you had in your page here extra text all out in here that have links in them, you don't want them to be the same style as the ones in here, so you have to separate them. And the way to separate them in this case is to use the A after the LI with a space in between, so that the browser knows to look for the LIs, and then when in those LIs, look for the A's and style these a certain way. So the certain way, first thing, we want to get rid of this underline. So to get rid of that underline, text decoration, none. We need to set the color. Color is FFF, white. And we can set a font size. Let's say 20 pixels. So short of getting a Google font or an Adobe font, we can stop there. Check this out in our browser. 3, 2, 1. Now we've got their links. They no longer have the underline underneath them, and they're now properly colored white. So what's left to do is to change the font. Also add that we can hover over it and it'll change color. And we hover over this part in particular, that changes color. And then there's a little bit of space we need to get rid of here. And then add our Google font. So let's do that. Let's do the hover parts. The hover parts, if you remember from before, we have two different hovers. We have hovering over the list item and hovering over the A part, the link. So LI, we can put a semi or a colon, the word hover, and then whatever color it is. So the background of the list item changes color. So we can change this to, this is 333. And then the A changes color. So we can do A hover, and that color is ECABB2. They may be wondering, why not do LI A hover? We could do that. So let's start with A hover and make sure that they both work. 3, 2, 1, refresh. That works. That works. This is good. This works. This works. This is good. This works. This works. It's good. This works. This works. Good. So what if we added LI A hover? This actually works as well. So LI A hover does the same thing. The A properly changes color as we've instructed it. So this is good to do if you have more than one type of A links. then you can change the different hover colors. So I'll leave that here. Just check. Yep, all good. And then we have one more thing to do before we go to Google Fonts. There's a little bit of extra space here. We can get rid of this in our index. I'm going to put an ID on this first one. Call this button 1. Save that. Go to our style. LI hashtag BTN1, and then margin top 0. That will get rid of the extra space on the top of the list item there. 3, 2, 1, refresh, and now we've got a nice even surrounding of our list items. So last thing to do is bring in some Google Fonts. We'll try some Adobe Fonts as well. So let's go to Google Fonts. So here's Google Fonts. We can pick different fonts, of course. They've got herds and herds of them. One I want is this Lexant Mega one. So let's say I want to use this one. I'll click on it, take me to the specific page. And then the thing I want to do is click to select this style. So if there were other styles in this family, you could click select them there. So I'll select this one here, and then I can go right to this button in the top right corner. It might be blocked by the zoom thumbnail of me, but there is a button here with 3 squares and a plus sign. And if you have added styles to it, there's a red dot. So I'll click on that. And when you click on that, it brings in from the right side a selected family, slide in, and you have your HTML tag here to bring into your HTML. So it says here, to use on the web, to embed a font, copy the code into the head of your HTML. I can do that. So here we go. I'll copy this, bring this over to Atom, and the place it goes is in the head, of course. So I'll put it after my style sheet link here, paste it in here. So what we have is one link for pre-connection to Google Fonts, and then the actual link itself to the actual font file, which is the Lexant Mega one. So if I save this, I'm only half done. I have to go back to Google Fonts and grab the font family stuff. So I'll copy this, take this over to my CSS, and then where I want this to be is here, because I want my list items, the A part in the list items to be that font. So I'll just paste. And now if I save this, go back to my browser, 3, 2, 1, refresh. Now I have the proper font in place here. So now I got this cool Lexant Mega typeface. And now I'm finished. This is my demo. So next I'll show you how to use Adobe Fonts. It's slightly different, but the end result's the same. Now let's talk about Adobe Fonts. So if you come to Adobe Fonts, you can search for fonts, of course, to use in like Photoshop and Illustrator. You can also use them on web projects. So I have one started here. I can show you. So if you go to web projects, I have a web project already, and what they have here is a link to put in your HTML. So if I click on edit project, I can show you, I only picked one of these out of the family and one of these out of this family, and then they give us the code in here to paste in our HTML. So I'll start a new one just so you can see how the process works. We go to Adobe Fonts, or let's search for a new font. Or let's browse fonts. Okay, so you can pick any of these, of course. Let's try this one. So if you go to View Family, You can either activate them individually for your programs, or you can add to a web project. So I'll add to a web project. So I can pick which styles I want out of the families. Maybe I just want via book, or no, I just don't want that. Turn the rest of these off, turn these off, turn these off. And then create or add to an existing project. So click create a new project. Let's call it Jefferson Spring 2021. Click create. And now they give you the HTML that you need. So I'll copy that. And then here is the CSS stuff you need. So you can copy that later. I'll come back to it. So we can go back here and go to our HTML. Paste this. We'll keep it together, paste them together. You'll see that they still use the typekit.net for that. So you'll know that that's for your Adobe fonts. And then I'll need to grab this. You can either grab all of this or just the font family. Let's just do font family for now. Copy this, take this over to CSS. Instead of Lexan Mega, I can either paste over this or I can paste it under, and this will override this first font family. So if you have two of the same property in your CSS, the second one or the last one will override the one above it or the ones above it. So let's just do that. So if I go here to my browser, back to here, demo, 3, 2, 1, refresh, and now it's switched to Obvia. So this overrides the one above it. So that's how you use Adobe fonts. And if you wind up making HTML emails in your life, then you can use this @import link instead. So that's Adobe fonts.